everybody. This is Jennifer Matarese, and before I get started with the episode today, I'd just like to take care of the usual housekeeping. For starters, paid requests are now reopened. If you're interested in submitting a disaster request, please double-check the list of requests I most recently posted to the podcast's Facebook and Tumblr to make sure your request has not already been made. Also, please look through past episodes to verify I haven't already covered the disaster in question. To submit a request, you can send a donation of $30 or more to the podcast PayPal at disasteraria@mail.com, or on Venmo at Disaster Area Podcast, or on Cash App at Disaster Area Pod. Just add the name of the disaster to the notes on your donation. If you have an idea for an episode subject, but you're not sure if it qualifies, feel free to message me and I can approve one way or the other. Although it's very rare that I don't approve something, so just keep that in mind. I have a very open mind when it comes to disasters. The subject from this particular episode was chosen by Ashley, and I'd like to thank them for the request and for the donation. Now, if you'd still like to help support the podcast in another way, you can do so with a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App, or on a per-episode basis through Patreon at www.patreon.com/disasterareapodcast. A per-episode donation of even as little as $1 an episode can help me do things like pay the rent and keep the lights on, and if you do join the Patreon, you will get new episodes ad-free as soon as I record them, rather than waiting until they are released. So if you do become a patron, I would very much appreciate it. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Disaster Area Podcast, on Instagram at Disaster Area Pod, and on Tumblr at Disaster Area Podcast. Also, please think about rating and reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or wherever else that you might listen to it on. And as always, the sources for each new episode can be found at disasterareapodcast.wordpress.com and in the episode description wherever you might be listening to me. The sources for this episode include 3 that are named Fire in Paradise, apparently very popular. The excellent Netflix documentary, the Frontline episode, and the book by Alastair G. and Dani Anguaino. I hope I'm saying that right at least one of these times. There are also several news articles, particularly from local station ABC10 about the grand jury documents, and the New York Times regarding the response from President Donald Trump. You can also find a link to drone footage of Paradise shortly after the blaze, while the town itself was still yellowed by smoke. With all of that taken care of, thank you very much for listening, and welcome to Disaster Area. Episode 248, The Campfire, Part 2. November 8th, 2018. 85 deceased, 17 injured. When last we left our beautiful mountain town of Paradise, it was on all of the fire. Like, all of the fire. Everything in town was ablaze. And so many of the people in Paradise were in their cars trying to escape and absolutely not moving. The roads in town, Clark, Pence, Skyway, they were a parking lot. There was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to move. Clark and Skyway, like I said, it's a major intersection in Paradise. Not just because there were so many vehicles packing this intersection was it important. Sounds really weird. Basically, there were a lot of vehicles that were at Clark and Skyway because that's where they were stuck. There were also a lot of fire engines there. And at this point, there's simply nowhere else to go. The fire's everywhere. And everyone at that intersection, which is about a good 150 people or so, not counting the firefighters, was stuck in perhaps the worst place in town to be stuck. Now, on one corner, you have the Fast Trip gas station. On another was the Fins, Fur, and Feathers fishing and hunting store, loaded with ammunition which could easily start whizzing around the area from the heat. And behind the small cluster of businesses with the freshly poured cement lot across the street from those was a bunch of propane storage tanks. If someone wrote this particular arrangement of items into a disaster movie, the director would probably ask them to dial things back just a smidge. It's basically the worst place in the world they could have been. They are surrounded by things that could explode, catch fire. Like, I mean, the gas tanks at the gas station, these propane tanks, the bullets that are in the hunting store. It could become just an absolute bloodbath. But here, a lot of citizens of Paradise were stuck between a rock and 3 very explosive places. The officers and firefighters at Clark and Skyway did have one option for where to put the people there who simply couldn't get out at that moment. Now, the Fast Trip is on the south, the gas station. The Finn Fur and Feathers hunting store, that's on the west side of this intersection. On the eastern side of this intersection, on the north side of the road, there is what is... It's not a strip mall, but it's basically like a little cluster of businesses that is surrounding what, I mean, normally you would call a parking lot, but I guess it had been freshly poured. It was brand new. It was this cement slab. I don't think it even had lines painted on it yet. And so that was about as centrally located as the firefighters were going to get. The trees around them were in a circle, basically, and you do have this area above them that is open, kind of. Police officers started ordering people stuck at Clark and Skyway out of their cars and to the lot across the street from the Fast Trip gas station. So you have people who are getting out of their cars, they're grabbing what they can, or they're just, they're getting grandma, putting her in her wheelchair, pushing her up the hill, whatever it takes to get to this centralized location. The firefighters radioed for helicopters or planes to fly over and drop fire retardant on that location. There were different ways that the Cal Fire could get that sort of fire retardant onto the fire. The problem is that because of the smoke and because of how high a helicopter would have had to fly to drop that fire retardant, it wasn't going to work out. It wasn't going to help as much as they would have wanted or hoped. For those gathering at that location, what was coming toward them from the east was a wall of flames between 50 and 100 feet high. One woman in the Fire in Paradise Netflix documentary described a biblical horror in the fireballs and burning embers which fell from the sky down toward Clark and Skyway. You hear a lot about these fireballs, these huge fireballs that came down like it's being pummeled by comets. It's just awful. At this point in the documentary, a video pointing down a street in which everything is painted in blacks and reds shows a narrow spinning tornado of fire swirling in the middle of the street. It would almost be beautiful if it weren't so life-threatening. I am not going to pretend that I don't want a framed print of that photo on my wall. It really is. It's just the things that nature can do are so incredible, and some of the most terrifying things that nature can do are just absolutely beautiful, even though they can kill you. I am fascinated by lightning storms in volcanoes that are erupting, in the smoke, all the lightning that you can see. Those are my favorite kinds of natural occurrences. And so I have a lot of pictures of that as my background on different electronics that I have. It always seems to end up being, at some time or another, volcano lightning. Anyway, finding out that the Optimo restaurant was unlocked, firefighters escorted citizens inside to take what little shelter they could provide. Some of them had to go to the bathroom. I mean, it has been a long time, and so they really need to get out and go and do what they have to. And you can't exactly, go off the side of the road and go pee because everything is on fire. So they get escorted over to this restaurant. Some people get to go inside and go pee. There are some people who are use the restrooms, I probably should say. Some people are still kind of outside because it's a lot of people to pack into that one building. There are stories of people who were on that concrete slab, and had blankets and were just pulling them over their heads, like firefighters who work in like rural areas fighting these sorts of fires. They have fire blankets that they do this with, and it's basically the same thing, except you're doing it with like a Hello Kitty blanket. Like it's that kind of a thing. It's whatever you can do to keep yourself safe. Meanwhile, the firefighters are spraying water onto the roof of the Optimo restaurant to try and keep that building from burning. So it was still hard to miss the loud bang of the propane tanks not far away from them as they exploded in the intense heat. The way that they're described in the documentaries I watched, it sounds as though it feels like it sounded a lot like if you've ever seen the documentary 9/11, which is the one that the Naudet brothers did. Jules, who was the one who was in the buildings at the time, recorded the sound of people jumping and hitting the ground. And that was the sound that I was imagining as they were talking about these propane tanks blowing up. Like every 30 seconds or every minute you're getting bang, bang, bang. But it's not like, it's not just a door slam. It is a very loud, very scary bang. For some, they were stuck simply lying down on the concrete slab outside, covering themselves in whatever was available and hoping it would be enough to protect them. It would be hours before the fire died down enough for vans from safer areas to arrive to transport those at Clark and Skyway away from the intersection. So just imagine you're going through this for hours. You're in that restaurant for 2-3 hours thinking that you're going to burn to death. You're maybe outside, surrounded by all of this fire, and the gas stations across the street and the propane tanks are blowing up, and everything is terrifying, and you're there for hours. Leaving meant driving west on Skyway past the burned husks of the cars they'd abandoned, homes still engulfed in flames, trees which looked more like blackened telephone poles than regular vegetation. Unfortunately, there were others throughout Paradise who hadn't made it to Clark and Skyway or even gotten out of their homes. Police officers mostly were trying to their best to reach those they had been alerted were trapped in their homes. At around 5 p.m., for example, Officer Sean Norman made his way to a home on a side street where a family and their dogs were hunkering down. Now, he had a dash cam on in his car, and I also believe, being police, he also had a camera on his person as well. And as he approached where they lived, he could practically see the firewall eating up the road behind him. Now there's a firewall, and it is definitely a firewall. When you see an image of it, it is a wall of fire. It's just yellow all the way up and down. Stopping in front of the house, he signaled to the family to get into his vehicle. In some sort of comical farce, they refused. So Officer Norman and a couple of colleagues rushed into the house, grabbed them and their dogs, and shoved them outside into the police vehicles. One of the dogs ran back, and one of the family members demanded to return to get him. I think it was all of the family members. They're all kind of like, we have to go get the dog. And Officer Norman said, no, look, if you go back there, you're going to die. You can't go back there. So unfortunately, in this story, there is the loss of a dog. But everyone else in the vehicle, despite their protests, would live. Officer Norman's dash cam caught a literal wall of flame to the left. He's kind of like turning around or pulling out of the driveway. And so, he could turn to the right, which is on fire, or he could turn to the left, which is not on fire. It is fire. That's all it is. It is just a big wall of fire. And so he has to make a right and then gun it. And he does. He just slams on the gas and manages to make it through with everybody in the vehicle alive. In the Netflix documentary, Norman says, quote, "That family probably don't like me very much, but they're alive. At least they're alive to not like me, right?" 85 people died when a wildfire which started in Pulga, California, spread westward and devoured the town of Paradise before everyone could escape, making it the deadliest California wildfire in a century. When skimming over a list of the dead, it's hard to ignore the majority of those who lost their lives were elderly or disabled, physically, mentally, or both. Many of them burned inside their homes or just outside as the smoke overwhelmed them. Some of the people who were disabled were trying to get away. They really were. But there was only so far that they could go, and they would be found, trying, at the car, trying to get in it, or on the porch, trying to get down the steps. Like, it was really difficult. Later, many of them burned inside their homes or just outside as the smoke overwhelmed them. Later, search teams in hazmat suits, hard hats, and filtered masks would go over every inch of Paradise looking for what was left of the dead. In many cases, it was simply chips of bone or teeth. One team specifically searched for cremains of those who'd been dead and cremated prior to the fire, sitting in homes in urns and left behind by evacuating families. This is actually a really cool story because it was a woman with her trained dog, and it was a border collie. And if you know anything about border collies, you give them a job and they'll do it. They could do your taxes if they wanted to. Like, they want to do a job. So what she was bringing this dog to do was find the cremains of people who had died before the fire. And they actually managed to find a lot of people's cremated relatives that they had left behind. They couldn't, obviously, it's really hard to collect every bit of those cremains, but they were able to give some of them back, some of that back, a little bit of it back. And that was enough for the people who got that much of their loved ones back. The campfire would continue to burn for weeks, spreading out over 240 square miles of Northern California. Over 12,000 structures were destroyed by the fire, 9,000 of them homes. Drone footage of the area afterward, while the air is still yellowed and unclear, shows cinder block walls still up around collapsed roofs, crumbled to ash, rectangular footprints of houses and trailers, looking like the remains of a used incense stick, and in between them, here and there, a nearly undamaged building. One person could lose everything while their next-door neighbor lost nothing. The Netflix documentary shows a short clip from a video made by survivor Greg Woodcox, but the short clip is graphic and startling, so a trigger warning for those who watch it. I'm going to describe it now. I would suggest that if you don't want to hear this, to skip ahead like 2.5, 3 minutes. I think it's going to take me to do this. It is really hard. It was harder to watch, obviously, but it's very hard to listen to. The full video is much more upsetting. Woodcox, who'd been traveling down a street with several other cars looking for escape, got out of his car, some kind of SUV, to look for shelter when the line of cars encountered a fence. Woodcox, who'd had to leave his dogs in the car, it wasn't like he had intentionally left them there. He was kind of, he was going to look for a way around or out. He was going to get back in the car and go, but he left them there for just a moment and got separated from them. So at that point, he can't get back to them. He sees a fox, like something out of a Disney movie. He sees a fox, and he follows the fox. And he ends up at a creek bed that still has water in it. So he hunkers down in this creek bed. He goes to this creek bed. He lies down, and the inferno sort of passes right over him. He gets down, afterwards, he gets up. He kind of, does what you would probably do, which is pat yourself all over. Am I okay? Do I have any injuries I don't know about? That sort of thing. And then he takes out his phone, which somehow has survived all of this. And he starts recording what he saw. In the video, we see a grayish world as Woodcock speaks, his voice hoarse from trying to breathe through the smoke, one imagines. It might be that his voice is always like that, but also it does sound like he has been breathing in a lot of smoke. Well, I'm gonna show you what happened here, he says. He focuses the camera on a blackened lump on the ground. This poor soul got burned up, he says, and it's only now we're positive it's a body. You look at this thing that's left behind, and it barely looks like a person. It's just devastating. Then Woodcock says, literally burned. This is a body, people. He pans a few feet back toward the remains of the vehicle, one of its doors open. There is a similar, smaller, blackened lump near there. This is what fire does, he says. A small dog. The bodies lie near a burned-out minivan with another SUV parked about 5 feet away. This is what happens, Woodcock continues as he walks towards the SUV. I was not, but oh my god, I'm feet away from here. This is where I jumped over the fence right there. The video goes black as he presumably opens the door to the SUV. This guy didn't make it. There's a bunch of dead bodies here. We got trapped. He then says, oh, in this, horrified tone. Woodcock gets out of the SUV. It still sounds as though an engine is running. It's actually his car. His car continued to run. The engine continued to run even while this inferno is blowing over this area. As he pans around, almost everything seems to be in black and white, ash all over the ground, the trees simply dark trunks cleaned of leaves. He says something that sounds a little garbled, but very much like, I can't believe that my car still runs. He turns the camera on 3 cars shucked straight down to the metal by the fire. He starts walking toward them, saying, now, this is the poor guy, came down to get my crippled friend out, and he didn't make it. Nobody made it down here. These people all got burnt out. He approaches the nearest car, which appears to have been torched clean by the fire. And he says, I was right down below them here, and my friend, that's the car's on fire, he says, to which a little bit of flame can be seen in the rear of the car. In what's left of the passenger seats, as though propped up there as a Halloween decoration, are the skeletal remains of a victim. You can see he's dead, Woodcock says, and his mother. Woodcock moves on to the next car. There doesn't look to be anyone left in that car. I'm sorry, buddy, Woodcock says, presumably to the dead man in the first car. And now on to the next car. Yeah, these people all got burnt out. There's dead bodies in here. They're all burned. Every fucking one of them. You can see the bones in the front seat. These people got burnt out in their cars like I almost did. Dead, dead, dead. Everybody here is dead. He pans from one car to another. All 4 cars. I went to their house right here in this white car to get them out. She had to put her makeup on. She died because of it. He moves on to the SUV again. I cannot believe my Jeep made it. My dogs. I prayed. This is the Holy Spirit working for you. I mean, my dogs went through the fire. Everybody died down there. The screen goes black again, and there's the sound of metal falling, like someone dropping a license plate on the ground. Oh my god, Woodcock says. He and his dogs get into the Jeep. Hi, babies, he says to the dogs, then starts to drive away. As he drives, he once again laments the loss of the others in the cars behind him, then turns the camera on himself. He brakes a little, saying he went down into the creek and the fire went over him. I thought I was going to die, he says. I ain't lying. I'm going to write a book about this. Incredible. His phone continues to record the desiccated world outside, which looks as though it could crumble to nothing with a strong enough breeze. Woodcock's nephew would later post the video online, upsetting some of the families of the victims for obvious reasons. No one wants their loved ones to be seen in that condition after having died a painful and horrifying death. That included the family of Andrew Burt, who can be seen in a horrific state along with the remains of his dog, Bernice, at the start of the recording. The Netflix documentary's clip contains only the bit about Woodcock's disabled friend and the shot of his skeleton sitting in its vehicular casket. While it doesn't include the bodies of Bert and his dog, the sight of the dead man in the car is upsetting enough. One of the victims of the fire was 82-year-old John Sedgwick. Sedgwick was one of those guys every small town has, an older guy who's known by all and knows all the right people. Like Sedgwick, they're usually former or current volunteer firefighters. Our town has one. He's my downstairs neighbor. If my apartment catches fire while I'm at work, it's his job to rescue Professor. That's not even something I have to ask him to do. He'll just do it. No questions asked. He is a very nice guy, and that's the thing about these guys. They all seem to be named John, and they all seem to be the kind of guy who like volunteer to sweep up after, hometown celebrations or like trunk or treat or things like that. They are very, they're social, but they're not like social. They're like, everybody knows him. It's that kind of a thing. John Sedgwick's daughter evacuated, but he stayed in town to help despite his age. Over the course of the day, he did what he could to protect the landmark buildings, the cemeteries, the homes of neighbors, spraying down lawns and roofs. He offered to help the firefighters. He was like, what can I do? What do you need? He refused to leave, and he wanted to help as much as possible. That night, after so many others had evacuated, Sedgwick was still there, helping firefighters protect the depot from burning as the clock rolled over past midnight. They used what water they had to wet the grass and roof and whatever they could manage so they could try to keep the depot from burning down. Sedgwick's home was just behind the depot, down a driveway. So as the fire increased, Sedgwick headed up his driveway toward his home. At the time, the temperatures around him were around 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit or 815 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cremate someone. As the flames and the heat began to destroy the home Sedgwick had lived in for decades, it took John Sedgwick from this earth as well. Later on, his daughter would be asked, they were like, well, we found some remains and we need your genetic material we need your DNA to test against him. And the thing was that it had always been kind of a family thing that her mom was like, well, he might not be your father. And so when she got back the results that the remains were related to her and that they were John Sedgwick, she also gets the answer that he was her father all along, and it didn't matter one way or another. He raised her, he took care of her, but also, he was officially her father. So that was, at least something good for her that came out of it, was this guarantee that man, that was your father. The source of the fire was obvious from within minutes of the first witness to spot flames at the base of the electrical towers up the hillside from Poe Dam. Nearly 100 years prior to the campfire, the original company to erect the Caribou-Palermo transmission line erected the stretch of towers and wires which lined up like marching soldiers over the hills by Pulga and Concow. But now they were owned by PG&E, and it was their job to provide maintenance and replace parts on towers whose builders were long dead at this point. So here's the thing. When you have work, and after that there's a doctor's appointment, and you're completely out of groceries, so you need to go to the store, and in the middle of all of this, your oil light comes on. Now, a lot of you might be like me and do the wrong thing, which is to go, I'll deal with it later, and keep driving. It would turn out that PG&E had the same sort of response to parts that almost definitely should have been replaced, at the very least, back when new episodes of Friends were still airing. PG&E called this response run to failure. There would later be debate about whether or not this is like an official thing at PG&E, but people behind the scenes were like, yeah, this is a thing. It was run to failure. It was basically, you didn't fix it before it broke. It would have to break, and then you would replace the part. So if it could manage to hold on for 100 years, then it was going to stay there for 100 years. 7 months prior to the fire in Paradise, a PG&E crew working on a power line in the Bay Area found what was described as severe wear, which is understandable given that the line in question was 72 years old. So the company's materials lab whipped together a report analyzing the estimated life of those particular parts until they gave out. This isn't a we investigated ourselves and it turned out we did nothing wrong scenario, as much as it is we investigated ourselves and we're about to do something we know is pretty wrong. The lab report estimated that the parts in question could have 28 more years before they gave out. Now, keep in mind, these are like the hanger plates that they brought in. They brought in these hanger plates, and they were like, these need to be looked at. And so they look at these hanger plates, and they say they have 28 more years before they can give out. The maintenance department, on the other hand, had rules about replacing those parts, and it wasn't wait 3 decades until they break. It stated, according to an ABC10 article, that, quote, steel parts need to be repaired immediately if they're worn at least halfway through. And when I say it, I mean like the Bible that the maintenance department work with. They have this, their workbook or their book full of information that every sort of like manufacturing or engineering job or something along those lines, you have those books or those reports that have all of the information that you need to do your job. And this particular book said, if you have a part and it's made out of steel and it needs to be repaired, if it's worn halfway through, it needs repairing. You can't wait 28 years. You have to do it now. If hanger plates were worn by 30%, so if they had gone through like, I don't know, like a crescent moon about in the bottom of this hole, PG&E had a year to replace the part. The ABC10 article would find that hanger plates on other transmission lines closer to San Francisco were worn down by 62%. They practically made an entirely different hole. But the lab report gave PG&E a reason to wave a dismissive hand in the air and say, it can wait. Regardless of the fact that the report accounted for wear, but not cracking, like metal fatigue, and regardless of its findings that additional inspections on lines through the state were warranted. Their report said you need to start sending out more people to, inspect these lines. And PG&E was like, maybe later. Maybe later. I gotta finish my game, Mom. It's like that. It should also be noted that the materials lab at PG&E produced that report based on the hanger plates brought back to them from the line being worked on near the Bay Area. The problem was that the techs who brought those plates back didn't know exactly where they came from. So the people writing that report didn't know the ages of the plates, or what towers they'd been attached to, or the last time they'd been inspected. They had to make an educated guess, in one case working off photos taken in the 40s. Suffice it to say that you can't write an accurate lab report when you're just guessing at a bunch of the factors. Now, here's another thing. On September 9th, 2010, in a residential neighborhood of San Bruno, California, a natural gas pipeline owned and managed by PG&E exploded just after 6 p.m., killing 8 people. The company was charged with and found guilty of 6 federal felonies, for which they were put on probation. This meant PG&E had a legal babysitter of sorts in Judge William Alsup, our hero, as you'll see, keeping an eye out for anything they might do wrong that might violate that probation. Later on, after the destruction of the campfire, PG&E would face a homicide investigation for the Zug fire in 2020, which killed 4 people. If PG&E were a person, it'd be a quite successful serial killer. Really impressive. Amazing, really. A mass killer as well. Like, if it were a person, I mean, there would be a Ryan Murphy series on all of the things it's done. Anyway, but because the company wasn't a person, despite what the Citizens United Supreme Court decision claims, you couldn't exactly send it to prison. So instead, the higher-ups would barely see a hint of punishment after making decisions that led to the deaths of dozens. As for PG&E itself, it could continue to throw money at California politicians, including Governor Gavin Newsom, and go make the exact same sort of deadly decisions it did regarding the campfire. In fact, in violation of its parole, PG&E made a deal with Butte County regarding the honey fire it caused the previous year without alerting Judge Alsup. The honey fire is a bit like the campfire. The honey must be like Honey Road or something along those lines, but it does, it sounds very strange considering. However, that probation still hung over their head, and Judge Alsop was not remotely afraid to call them out on their backroom dealings and denials that the Zog and campfires, not to mention a further 15 fires CAL FIRE claimed were started by PG&E, were caused by their antiquated and worn equipment. At one point, Alsop said in 2 years, 3% of California burned up. Think about that. 3% of the whole state burned up. He didn't need to clarify exactly how much of that blood was on PG&E's hands. He also, he's great. Reading Fire in Paradise, the book, you read his quotes, and he is not taking any of PG&E's garbage. He does not let any of their excuses slide. He hears them saying, well, there was the drought and there's climate change. And he's like, look, climate change and the drought are factors, but you started the fire. You did that. You started the fire. You did that. And his ability to call out PG&E, with everything that they do, there are some times where he is like trying to be a little bit nice to at one point, I think he's trying to be nice to the CEO who replaces the person before them that set something on fire. And I mean, you kind of have to be nice, but also, because it wasn't their fault this fire started. They weren't CEO at the time. But also, they're CEO now, and this is what they walked into. So maybe we don't have to be so nice to them. In a YouTube video posted by ABC10, reporter Brandon Rittman describes the exact location where the campfire started. The video starts with the camera pointed at a group of electrical towers set up on a hillside. Rittman identifies the setup as the Caribou-Palermo transmission line, which is owned by PG&E. The area in question is within a narrow canyon. In the video, taken a year after the fire, Rittman notes that there is not a lot of evidence of the fire at the base of the towers. Tower 27/222 still stands to the left, looking like an angry little stick figure man with his arms akimbo. But then the camera pans to the right, and the hillside next to it is still covered with the blackened poles which used to be lush green trees. On the other side of that hill are Concow, Magalia, and Paradise, which are 8 miles away. Rittman then asks, "Why are these here?" "Well, I'll show you." The camera turns to the left as Rittman heads across a patch of dirt. Then the camera is pointed down into the valley below. Rittman identifies what we see below as the hydroelectric Poe Dam. The Caribou-Palermo line goes up the hill from that, then circles around where Rittman is standing back to where the starting point of the campfire was. Rittman notes that the particular line is out of service at the moment the video is being recorded, as PG&E is in the middle of dotting all its I's and crossing its T's with all of the ensuing litigation and its 6 federal felonies related to the fire. Rittman also notes that, when he says 6 federal felonies, I think he means the previous 6 federal felonies, not the felonies that came later because of the campfire. Rittman also notes that because of the criminal investigation, a monitor has been assigned to do surprise inspections on PG&E, but that the number of inspectors in the state, not just for PG&E but for everyone, is a solid dozen. Not only did the state have only a handful of inspectors for these power lines, the tower in question, one just down the ridge from the topmost tower, was a pain in the ass to reach, to put it mildly. Rittman describes arriving at the site involving driving up on a bunch of increasingly smaller roads, difficult enough without climbing a hillside at the end of it. PG&E did perform a ground-based inspection of 27222, heavy on the ground-based, 4 years before the fire started. Above them hung a steel hook covered in rust and threatening to break, a hook that had been there the entire 97 years the tower had stood. The last time somebody had climbed that tower to inspect it was 2001, and in 2001, they should have been able to see that wear on that hook and that hanger plate. Now, 6 months prior to the fire, PG&E inspectors were ordered to inspect the towers at the Caribou-Palermo line. But when they did climb towers along the line, 27 222 was not one of them. Later, after the fire, the company would find hanger plate erosion similar to that on 27/222 on 13 towers on the Caribou-Palermo line. Perhaps if PG&E had sent out inspectors just a little bit earlier, 85 people might still be alive. The campfire would go so far as to approach Chico to the west, leading the eastern part of that town to be evacuated as well. Fortunately, it didn't go all the way into Chico. It got really close, but thankfully it didn't enter the town. With all of the damage it caused, the campfire would become the most expensive natural disaster of 2018 at $16.5 billion worth of losses. On November 25th, CAL FIRE made an official announcement that the campfire was finally fully contained. Of course, then came the big question: to move back or not to move back? FEMA quickly went to work providing temporary housing for those survivors who'd lost their homes in the fire, but those could only last for so long. You can't live in FEMA housing forever. It is meant to be a temporary scenario. It is basically like the most basic tiny home that you've ever seen. You can't like hang things on the wall. It's just not meant for that. It is meant to keep a roof over your head so that you can stay safe until you can rebuild or find other accommodations. If you didn't have fire insurance, which many didn't, what was the point? Over 8,000 structures throughout Paradise needed to be razed, the land cleared of debris and possible remains and dangerous substances which might affect the landscape. You could certainly move back if you were stubborn enough to do so. That could mean a long wait, however. There were some people who bought like RVs and were just going to wait on the land until they could rebuild their homes. They were just going to park there. But part of the thing that FEMA had going in regards to providing them with funding and that sort of thing was that they couldn't stay on that land. And they had good reason. This wasn't FEMA just being annoying or making it more difficult for them. It was problems like those dangerous chemicals that might be in the land and in the water. That fire burned things like car batteries and asbestos and plastics containing benzene, and the ground needed to be cleaned of toxins before people could rebuild on it. They actually tested the water in the area, and benzene came up after the fire. And if you know anything about benzene, it's not good. You can't have that in the water. That's not good. You can't have that like that. You can't be around it. It's not a good thing. I always think about this is dating me, but I always think about the episode of ER where there was a benzene spill and people were being brought into the ER covered in benzene, and it was making the doctors sick just from like touching them and inhaling this benzene and breathing those fumes in. And so they had to evacuate the ER. And it's one of my favorite episodes because my favorite character at the time was John Carter, who was like the young intern guy who starts, kind of grows throughout the series. And in that episode, he takes charge of the evacuation and says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put these people outside. We're going to put these people, in the cafeteria. These people are going to go here. Like he took control. Everybody was fighting and he took control of that. So, but that's what I think about when I hear benzene. I think of that episode and how benzene affects people and how it affected people in that episode. But the trauma of the fire and the struggle that comes with starting over wasn't something a lot of families were willing to go through, especially if they lost loved ones in the fire. With 40,000 people living in Paradise and the surrounding areas, there simply wasn't enough housing to accommodate them all in Chico or Oroville. You can't just move like 10,000 people into a town and have there be, places to put them. This is 40,000 people. Like, even if you split it between Oroville and Chico, it's still a lot of people. And there is simply not enough housing to just throw them into town. So that was something where, you had to weigh your options. You had to say, okay, do I want to move in with relatives? Do I want to move to another state and try there? What do I want to do? Life just moved on. People had to figure out where they wanted to go. For those who stuck around, plenty of people either donated to help them start over or arrived to do what they could. people joined in with homeowners searching the remnants of their homes, assisting them in finding photos or mementos or anything else they could find. There's one story in Fire in Paradise, the book, that made me kind of laugh, which is that one woman was excuse me, she accepted the help of a group who had come to help people look through the remains of their homes for things that they owned. Now, this group was evangelical Christians, but, obviously they're doing a very good thing. They're helping out. They're doing, this service for these people who really need help. But also, this woman had a bunch of dildos in her house, which I should warn before I say that. But she did have a bunch of sexual items in her house, and she was really worried that they would find these and think badly of her. But fortunately for her, at least, they had burned up in the fire. The chemicals may have linked into the ground, but that story made me laugh. I had to put the book aside for a sec. It made me giggle. Like, I think we all have something in our house that you're kind of worried that, like, one day you're going to die, or the house is going to burn down or something. And when people are looking through your, like, drawers, they're going to slam something shut. It's the somebody please come to my house and delete my internet history thing. It's that. I think I have a sticker on one of my Kindles that says, when I die, somebody please delete my Kindle history. And that seems futile, considering that my mom has access to my Kindle account so she can read my true crime books. And I have a lot of gay romance on there. So yeah, I don't think I'm worried anymore about anybody deleting my internet history or my Kindle history. Anyway, among those who came to Paradise to help was World Central Kitchen, the charity founded by celebrity chef Jose Andres, who travel to disaster areas to provide food. One of these days, I really want to do an episode on World Central Kitchen. I am amazed by the stuff that they do, and it's so impressive, and it's so helpful, and it just brings a smile to my face, because Jose Andres, and he brings all these celebrity chefs with him. He brought, like, Guy Fieri with him to Paradise. It was just, it's just this really great thing that he does. In Paradise, they arrived just in time for Thanksgiving and served those unhoused by the fire a proper Thanksgiving dinner, complete with 7,000 pounds of turkey. On November 10th, 2018, President Donald Trump tweeted the following: "There is no reason for these massive, deadly, and costly fires in California except that forest management is so poor. Billions of dollars are given each year with so many lives lost, all because of gross mismanagement of the forests. Remedy now or no more Fed payments." For starters, the campfire was not a forest fire. It began in the wildland-urban interface, where developed areas for homes and businesses sit near undeveloped areas. This area was more bush than forest, and as any of my Australian listeners can tell you, and some of whom have told me, there's a big difference between the two. Secondly, the federal government manages almost 60% of the forest in California, meaning his complaint would have more heft if he did something about it rather than the state government, who only own 3% of those forests. Logging companies argued clearing excess timber would help prevent the state's fires, but the land around Paradise had been logged a decade earlier, removing exactly those sorts of potential fire hazards. The big problem with the campfire, and with others in the state, were things like the bone-dry brush, which caught fire, its embers spreading westward on the wind, not to mention the lack of rain. It was just a combination of all of that, and it's also warmer than normal because of climate change. Like, there are a lot of reasons why this fire happened. It's not because of forest mismanagement. On November 18th, President Trump arrived in Paradise to view the damage the wildfire left behind. While standing in the remains of one of the town's devastated mobile home parks, Trump made a suggestion while standing between Governor Jerry Brown and Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. Quote, "You gotta take care of the floors. You know, the floors of the forest? Very important. You look at other countries where they do it differently, and it's a whole different story. They spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. According to President Trump, he got that particular suggestion from the president of Finland, Sauli Niinisto, which, if I apologize, Finnish people, if I've mispronounced his last name. President Niinisto's reaction was essentially a more polite version of, he said I told him what? Now, by the way, Niinisto also had one of the cutest dogs owned by a political leader in the past decade, which isn't pertinent to the discussion, but should be noted anyway, because, yeah, I really don't have a good explanation as to why. To say the recommendation to, quote, rake the forests would become a target of mockery would be an understatement. To quote the old Esurance commercial, quote, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Later, during his visit to another area struck by wildfires in California, Trump would state, quote, I mean, as big as they look on the tube, you don't see what's going on until you come here. And what we saw at Pleasure, what a name, right now. In video, someone could be heard quietly prompting him with the correct town name. He continued, but what we just saw, we just left Pleasure. This time, a chorus of people corrected him. According to a recent Political article quoting Mark Harvey, the senior director of resilience policy on Trump's National Security Council staff, Trump's public promises to provide disaster relief to California following the Camp Fire, as well as other wildfires that year, was completely different behind the scenes. Harvey stated that Trump hesitated on giving California disaster aid at first. To be blunt, he didn't plan on giving them any. But Harvey brought out the data which showed that wildfire-affected areas like Paradise and Orange County, a notoriously red voting area in California, voted for him in the previous election. After that, Harvey claims Trump decided they could have the disaster funding after all. Okay, I really don't want to talk about the election, but I don't want to talk about anything related to American politics right now. I've already sent in my vote and I'm done. But I want to explain this to people who are not American and do not understand the American political system very quickly. We have the Electoral College, which means that each state gets a certain number of delegates. Now, some states should get more depending on how many people they have. California should probably have more delegates. Wyoming has 445,000 people and 3 delegates. California has something like, I want to say 45 million people in it and has maybe like 49 delegates. I didn't get to check. But it's not the same thing remotely. And the problem with the way that the Electoral College works is that I'm in Pennsylvania. It's a swing state. It's the swing state, this election. We're just so special. We're just so much more important than everybody else. For some reason, I am more important than every other American for some reason, just because I live in a town that happens to be in Pennsylvania. Because that's the way the Electoral College works. It's just the silliest, most ridiculous thing in the world. Anyway, if this state is as close as it's predicted that it might be, then one of the candidates could get 10,000 votes more than the other one, and all of the delegates go to that person who wins. Not half of them, all of them. Not maybe like half of them plus 1, because we have 19. So they could they could split it like 9 and 10, and then give 10 to the person who won. Then that's not how they do that. I think there is a state where they do, I think it's Nebraska where they split it. But anyway, what I'm saying is, the reason that I'm bringing all of this up when probably nobody wants to hear about the election anymore is because California is a notoriously blue state. That means it is, for anybody who doesn't know, that means it's primarily Democratic. And the reason that it's primarily Democratic is because of Los Angeles and San Francisco. That's where all of the people are. And they are very, very blue. Now, the rest of the state, a lot of it like in Paradise, like in Northern California, up by Sacramento, going down into like down by the Nevada border, like all of these other places are red. Orange County, just outside of Los Angeles, I believe, don't quote me on it, notoriously Republican area. He was refusing, or at least didn't want to, according to Mark Harvey. He did not want to give disaster aid for these wildfires to Paradise and to other locations that had been hit by wildfires because California turned blue. But the problem with that is that with so many people in California, let's say 20 million of them are old enough to vote. A lot of them are Democrats, yes. But there are a lot, millions of Republicans in California. And they all live outside the cities where these wildfires affect them. And so if you're only going to support the people who voted for you, which is not how being president is supposed to run, but if you're only going to support the people who voted for you, then you have to understand that the way the Electoral College works, the people who are Republicans in California are not being represented in our elections. And so this is a prime example of how that doesn't help them at all, because you have a president who doesn't want to help anybody who didn't vote for him, apparently. And I would say it's really hard for me to say that because I don't want anybody to say that I am accusing him of, something based on this particular story, except that he did that with Puerto Rico and with like other places that had been struck by hurricanes. And it was a recurring thing for him. I don't know if everybody else remember those 4 years. I unfortunately do. And he did have a habit of, if you voted for him, he was willing to give you money. If not, he didn't. And so in this particular instance, it was kind of like talking down to him to say, hey, not everybody in this state, just because it's blue does not mean everybody in it voted Democrat. That's not the way this works. Voted for the other guy. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I'm just going to stop talking about the election and stop talking about this. But I did want to bring up Trump's reaction and the way that he behaved after the fires, because it's really hard to tell the story of this fire without telling that and without making it very, very clear that it isn't the only time he ever responded to a disaster by questioning why he should help people who didn't vote for him. So, given what was left of the people who lost their lives in the fire, identification became a much more difficult project than normal. A special team who could identify genetic material with the tiniest scrap of bone set up shop next to the coroner's office, and they had plenty to work with. Or little to work with, but you know what I mean. On at least one occasion, they tested some remains, only to discover it was someone who must have curled up with two of their pets in their final moments. They tested these remains, and they were human remains, but they were also commingled with animal remains. So, you grab your cat and your dog, and you go hide in the bathroom, and that's basically probably along the lines of what happened. While 22 of the deceased were identified using everyday means like dental records and medical identification numbers on surgical parts within the victims' bodies, the other 63 victims took weeks, if not months, to match with DNA supplied by their family members. So a lot like John Sedgwick and his daughter, you would supply your information and your DNA information, and they would go out and they would find those chips of bone and those and that teeth and whatever else they could find, like little bits of flesh. I mean, it wasn't a lot. We're talking about enough to be carried in like a sandwich baggie. It wasn't a lot at all. And so what would happen is you would be waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting to the point where maybe you completely forgot about it, and all of a sudden you get a call saying we've matched your genetic material to the genetic material of these remains that we found. In the end, only one person was still missing. 51-year-old Sarah Martinez Fabia could not be located after the fire and after all of the remains had been identified. Martinez Fabia, who had a history of addiction issues, vanished after her apartment building burned down during the fire. She remains missing to this day. The only reason I bring up the history of addiction issues is because she had just gotten out of rehab but when she moved to Paradise, and then she relapsed. So she had a lot of issues in regards to, her addictions and her getting in touch with her family and keeping in touch. And so the fact that she was missing was, I don't want to say not surprising, but also, she may have gotten in her car and driven away, possibly. But it's also possible that she burned in the fire and nobody could find the remains within her apartment. So there's that. PG&E would eventually plead guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of criminal negligence related to starting the fire in the first place. The documentation presented to the grand jury for the company's indictment contained the names of about 200 PG&E employees, but ABC10 protested when PG&E filed a lawsuit with the intent of keeping those names from the public far longer than they should have been. Those sorts of documents get released like 10 days after the grand jury, so PG&E files a lawsuit, and now you can't see that information for like weeks and weeks and months until the lawsuit gets taken care of. And so PG&E, ABC10 kind of stepped up and was like, "Hey, this is garbage. This is something that shouldn't be allowed." The Wall Street Journal too also kind of backed them up and was like, "Come on, man." It's the Wall Street Journal, but also the reaction was basically, "Come on, man, really?" While PG&E wouldn't plan on increasing inspections significantly, they did swear to have enhanced inspections. Basically, if the line fell under certain triggers, I imagine, like age and maybe reports of some sort of problem or, something like that. Inspections would be done by the company using climbing inspectors, helicopters, or drones, depending on what best fit the situation. Tier 3 areas with the highest threat of wildfires would face inspections on every line every year. With those on the tier below that getting inspected every 3 years. PG&E would also make the change to burying the lines in areas like Paradise underground, although that was going to take a while, like decades. That's not just something you do on the spur of the moment. New York City had the same sort of problem following the blizzard of 1888. They had just all of their electrical lines, all their telegram lines, all of their telephone lines, they were all up in the air. And if you look at photos from the time, it's just wires all over the place. And after that storm, when the snow brought down all those wires, they realized we should bury these wires. And it took a while because you had to do that for a whole city. Now imagine you have to do that for a whole state, and it gets a little tricky. Unsurprisingly, the lawsuits against PG&E began being filed within days of the fire. Best to get a jump on trying to wring some accountability out of a huge corporation that always seems to get away with it, like the smart aleck teenager who breaks the fourth wall in sitcoms. And if anyone thinks I'm being hard on PG&E, please keep in mind that at the time of the Campfire, PG&E's probationary requirements included spending $3 million a year on ads in print and radio, print and TV, I believe, like just on these ads to tell the public they were criminals because of the last disaster they caused. On the bright side, they stopped charging the victims for electricity immediately after the fire, so that was nice of them. As for monetarily compensating those who lost loved ones in the fire, PG&E proposed they be given something bound to be worth it following this whole debacle. Stock in PG&E. This almost looked as bad as the moment in January of 2019 when PG&E announced $130 million in bonuses for its employees for their work the previous year, which, if anyone needs reminding, included causing the death of 85 people. A little backlash, to say the very least, and those bonuses vanished like an ember on the breeze. So as the lawsuits kept rolling in, PG&E declared bankruptcy for the second time in as many decades. It claimed to have $71 billion. One presumes that $130 million in bonuses was included in that, while looking at $52 billion and God knows how many lawsuits to come from wildfire victims in debt. PG&E went on to settle, not just with the local government and the victims of their families in Paradise, but those same sorts of folks in multiple places throughout California who'd lost property, homes, and loved ones to fires started by PG&E's faulty old equipment. This included $13.5 billion to be divided amongst fire victims who suffered through several wildfires the company started. So that's Paradise. That's other towns throughout the state where they had their towns burned down because of PG&E. It's a terrible arsonist is what that company is. If you go on Google Street View and wander around Paradise for a while, you can see just how much of it has been rebuilt. There are homes and shops, the high school, the churches. There are open patches in the landscape where trees or homes used to be. Driveways meet the road with no houses at the other end anymore. If someone didn't tell you that Paradise experienced the deadliest California wildfire in a century only a handful of years ago, you wouldn't be able to tell. But once they did, the clues are hard to miss. The hospital is no longer open, having closed following the fire and never reopening its doors. This meant the town's biggest employer followed the last tendrils of smoke out of Paradise. Now those who've returned to town need to travel to Chico or Oroville for medical treatment. But they're still in a town they love, and that's all that matters. Last that I checked, according to, I think it was according to the Wikipedia page, actually. So, I mean, it's Wikipedia, but as of November 2023, there were about 9,000 people still living in Paradise. So, it's getting back up there. It was 4,000 immediately after the fire. Like in the months following the fire, that's many people went back. So it's gone up by, in 5 years by 5,000 people. So that's a good thing. I wonder if there is kind of a feeling of it of, does lightning really strike twice? Can this really happen again in the same small town? Can we really have that sort of inferno here again? Or do you consider that and then go, but yeah, this is my home? I think that happens a lot with disasters. You see people who just said awful things about, Western North Carolina following Helene, and the Tampa area following Milton and around Milton. Why would you live there? Why would you go there? Why would you stay there? Blah, all this. God knows, of course, this week we had some insults to Puerto Rico that went through Maria and didn't really get as much help as they probably should have in getting rebuilt. And, there's the question. Why are you going to live there if there's going to be a disaster? And the thing is that the fact isn't going to change. There's going to be disasters everywhere. There's always going to be something that can threaten you no matter where you live. And can you decide, I don't want to live where there's tornadoes? Yeah, sure. I think my parents probably thought, well, we're going to live someplace where there isn't tornadoes. And in the past, 10 years or so, we've had more tornadoes than in the rest of my life. Are they big ones? No. Are they getting bigger? Yeah, kinda. So, things change, especially with climate change being the way that it is. There are problems and natural disasters that are happening all the time that it doesn't really matter where you live. Things can happen no matter where you live, that are going to be a threat. So to say to somebody else who's gone through a disaster, well, it's your fault for living there, is just, not only is it hopelessly cruel, it is ignorant of the fact that, for example, who in God's name would think that a hurricane is going to strike western North Carolina? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Like, things like this, it doesn't happen often. It does happen, but not on that level. Like, and even, it does get like the rains from that. But the thing is that when hurricanes travel over land, they kind of power down. And so by the time it would have reached North Carolina in the west, it should have powered down. And instead, it wiped away towns like, what was it, Chimney Rock. Chimney Rock looked like a gorgeous little town. Just beautiful little like touristy town where you could stop and maybe shop in some shops. And when you're driving around, the thing about the United States is if you took all the people out of it, it's a beautiful country. And that's not to say that I don't like people. If I could just drive around and there wouldn't be anybody around and I could just look at the sights and not have anybody disturb me, and like, I think I would be really, really happy. But the thing is, like, places like that, like Chimney Rock and little towns like Paradise and stuff like that, like, for the most part, little towns like that, like my hometown, I mean, are there things that are embarrassing or that I wouldn't want to tell people about my hometown? People's bad behavior, forms of bigotry, things that, like, yes, I would love to tell people about that. But also, like, when I'm walking down the street, you say hi to people. People say hi to me. People say hi to Professor. People know Professor's name. They don't know my name. They know Professor's name. Why? I don't know. But, oh, what a cute dog. Yeah, you can't pet him. He doesn't like people. Please get away from him. But, it's the kind of town where you say hi to people you're walking past the street, walk past on the street. And it's one of those things that these habits that you don't get out of, even when you're like, I've gone to visit New York City twice in the last 3 years or so. And each time I have to, kind of dial down the part of me that wants to say hi to people who are walking past, or like a nod or something along those lines. Like, no, you're in New York City. That's not how people in the city work. Just be to yourself, put on your headphones and just go on your way. Which I sure is a safety hazard, but whatever. I do love the city, but I could not live there permanently, I don't think, unless I had like $1 billion, but that wouldn't last long, because if I had $1 billion, I would immediately start buying people homes and paying off student loan and medical debt, and just paying for like charities for queer youth and refugees, and just I would go broke so fast. It would be incredible. I don't know if you could do that with $1 billion, but it would be my mission. So, but these towns that get affected by these sorts of things are I mean, even in big cities. I went to New Orleans when I was in senior year. I was the only one. It was a senior trip. It was our high school trip, actually. So it was everybody from freshmen to seniors, and I was the only one out of everybody who was thrilled to be going to New Orleans. Cajun food, jazz, heat. Yes, send me there. And rice. I was reading Mayfair Witches at the time. God, send me there. Like, I was so happy to be in New Orleans. And I just loved the atmosphere. And this is pre-Katrina. And the thing is that, like, I know there are issues with New Orleans in regards to crime and things like that. But also, it's such a beautiful city, and it's so full of music and love and laughter and just, oh God, the food. I love Cajun food so much. It's my favorite. But there's so much to love about America, and there's so much to love about this country. Even when things are bad, like, I always tend to think about, there is a spot on the National Mall, And if you've never been in the National Mall, okay, there's a spot in the National Mall, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's the big grassy area right in right where the Washington Monument and the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial are. But right across the street from the Washington Monument, on the grass between, I think it's the Holocaust Museum on the left and the American History Museum on the right, there's a big patch of grass. And what I love to do when I lived there was I would bring a book or my Kindle. I would bring like my headphones, my MP3 player or my cell phone or whatever I had, and I would get some food from the food trucks that are always lined up on that road. And anybody who lives in DC right now is going, oh, the food trucks. But there's a line of food trucks that's always on that road. And I would, go get whatever kind of food I want, sit down, cop squat, get comfy, get my book out, and put on some music and just sit there surrounded by so much history. And on a beautiful sunny day, nice warm, surrounded by people from all over the world, especially when you go to like the Lincoln Memorial. The last time I went to the Lincoln Memorial, I went with my brother, and there were so many people like from all different cultures, and you could see people in saris and in hijabs and all kinds of just different people that it's great. It's so great to see the world converging on one point and all of this history and all of this stuff. Just being able to sit in that one spot and just wallow is amazing to me. I find that amazing and beautiful. And I know right now for people who do live in America and who are dealing with everything, things are hard. But I sit here on my hard days and I think of that spot on the National Mall. And I think about just sitting there, eating a hot dog, maybe throwing a piece to the squirrels, and drinking a soda, reading some book, reading Red, White, and Royal Blue, I don't know, and just kind of listening to my playlist that I normally put on when I'm there. There's one band in particular, Bad Sun, I think it is, Cardiac, I can't remember exactly the name of the band, but I like their music, and it makes me, like, it perks me up, and it makes me feel like I love being, in that particular spot. And I'm just in this moment in time that's never going to be the same again, in a place where so much history has happened and so many things like the March on Washington and the AIDS quilt and all of the things that have been there and have happened, the battles of the War of 1812. Like there are things about that particular spot where I can like picture the history going on around me. And I'm not a patriotic person, but that's the kind of thing that makes me go like, wow, this is America right here. This is it. And what I would say is, that's what I love about America, is the history of it. The flawed, problematic, sometimes horrible, sometimes awful, but sometimes beautiful parts of our history. And our story is not pretty. It's not perfect. It hurt a lot of people, but I'm really, it makes me hopeful when I read about American history, even when bad things happen in it. When bad things happen in it, is it hard for me to read? Yes, but you can see good things happening too. And I try to hold on to those things, because if they can happen during the worst times, if they can happen during, just awful times, then they can happen now when things seem really difficult. And so my suggestion to anybody who is having a difficult time right now is to think of something that, just do something that makes you happy. Please, anything that makes you happy. I don't care. Go hug your dog. Try hugging my dog. He doesn't like people, but try hugging my dog. It may take you a little while. It's taken some of my coworkers at dog camp like months to get him to let them pet him. But you know, go splurge on Halloween candy. It'll be on sale this weekend. You know, whatever it takes. And I know people outside of the United States are also worried about what the outcome of this election will be. And what I have to say is just, oh God, cross your fingers for us, because you know, I don't know what's gonna happen, but you know, things are hard all over, and I'm just gonna be mentally meditating and sitting in that spot on the National Mall with like a bag of Cheetos and a bottle of Pepsi and a I don't know, a gyro. A gyro sounds really good right now. Oh, it sounds really good. Okay, thank you guys for listening again, and until next time, stay safe.